Welcome in everyone, this is Sean with MTG808 Jr., and today we're going to be taking a look at all of the significant cards that will be rotating out of the Standard Pauper format during our upcoming rotation, which will be happening on October 5th when Guilds of Ravnica comes out. Before we get into the details of that though, just want to make sure everyone knows about our upcoming plans for our tournaments. So we will for sure be running a December scholarship tournament where we'll be giving away $500 to our first place finisher and $250 in scholarship to our second place finisher. And we are hoping to run a second scholarship tournament this school year in May. That second tournament, depending on how close we get to our $400 a month stretch goal on our Patreon page, if we hit $400 a month, then we will for sure be able to run our May tournament. But I'm very optimistic about being able to do that, so I would say plan on having 2 scholarship tournaments this coming school year. So with that said, we will be having our regularly run, hopefully twice monthly Standard Pauper tournaments. These are the smaller tournaments that are great at great opportunities to kind of hone your skills, get a feel for your deck, get a feel for your metagame. So we have September 8th over at The Planet, Youth Standard Pauper, and September 16th over at Westside Comics, Youth Standard Pauper as well. Both these tournaments are before rotation happens, so all the current decks that we've been covering here on the YouTube channel, all of those are still legal. First tournament that we have scheduled right now for post-rotation will be October 21st, Youth Standard Pauper over at Westside Comics. This tournament, Kaladesh, Aether Revolt, Amonkhet, and Hour of Devastation will be rotating out of legality, so all of those cards will no longer be legal, but Guilds of Ravnica will be out, and all the cards in Guilds of Ravnica will be legal, so that will be kind of the first opportunity for people to kind of test out their new decks. So here is the fact page for Guilds of Ravnica, right, October 5th, and then here's a little more detail. October 5th, with pre-releases taking place. Where is that? Pre-releases. Oh, there it is. Pre-releases taking place the weekend of September 29th to the 30th. So, Guilds of Ravnica, they're returning to the plane of Ravnica, which is basically a plane that's one big giant city. There's 10 guilds that kind of rule the city, and this is the third time that the Magic storyline will be returning to Ravnica, so a lot of players are really excited about it. All the Ravnica sets in the past have been great. I expect great things out of this third return to Ravnica, and we'll talk more about how it's going to impact Standard Pauper as the spoilers start coming out, but for now we know that it will for sure be impacting Standard Pauper because a whole bunch of these cards will be rotating out and no longer be legal. So here's kind of a big snapshot of all the cards that we'll be talking about today. We'll take a little closer look at all of these. I've kind of grouped them into categories based on the decks that are losing out on all of these. So we're going to start over here. The boogeyman of the format. It won our May scholarship tournament this year, and it has taken down a number of our smaller youth tournaments as well. Mono White Aggro. Basically, thanks to the Amonkhet block and the Exert mechanic and the Embalm mechanic, Mono White Aggro has really just had the best creatures of any of the aggro decks. Sacred Cat, Fanbearer, Oketra's Avenger, Gustwalker, Unwavering Initiate, and Tallcrop Elite. All these cards are set to rotate out, and pretty much every build of Mono White Aggro has been playing if not a playset of all of these cards, close to a playset of all these cards, because these cards are just all amazing. They're great at attacking. They're great at, forcing your way through other aggro decks. They allow you to kind of get out early to an early start. They allow you to still win a long game, right? If the board stalls, Tallcrop Elite will just break it open. Fanbearer is great in a long game. You just neutralize their best creature. Gustwalker allows you to fly over them in a long game if the board gets mucked up. Unwavering Initiate and Sacred Cat are both basically 2 cards in one, thanks to the Embalm mechanic. So these creatures, they've just kind of been the backbone of the best deck in the format, and there aren't really replacements that are currently legal in Standard Pauper that are going to be able to fill the void left by these. So if there is going to be a mono white aggro deck after rotation, it will look very different. It will probably not be nearly as dominant as mono white has been for these past couple months. And, you know, honestly, Magic, one of the reasons it's such a great game is because, you know, they do such a good job with designing the cards, designing the sets, right? Creating lots of opportunities for deck building, and, you know, when rotation happens, we do have to say goodbye to some of our favorite cards, but it does create opportunities for new cards to move in. You know, Mono White has had its time in the sun these past couple years, and I'm excited to see what kind of steps in to fill the void. So, you know, we are saying goodbye to a lot of these cards. I don't know what necessarily is going to replace them, but we shall have to wait and see. Alright, so goodbye to Mono White. The next archetype that's really taking a big hit, and probably won't exist in anything close to its current form after rotation, is Artificers. Thanks to this card right here, Inventor's Goggles. If you've been following the channel, you know, we've made lots of content about how amazing Inventor's Goggles is, and whenever an Artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Inventor's Goggles to it, and then it's also an artifact that allows you to synergize with a whole bunch of the Artificers that are out. So, all of these Artificer cards are going to be leaving. Aether Swooper and Aether Chaser have kind of been the backbone of the Blue-Red Artificers deck. We have seen some people play either Grixis or maybe Blue-Black Artificers with Aether Poisoner, which is also an amazing card. Unfortunately, all of these cards are going to be rotating out. The Improvise cards, Bastion Inventor has been kind of one of the biggest threats in the format. A 4/4 hexproof creature that can come down as early as turn 4, turn 3, I guess, if you have like the God draw. But Bastion Inventor, you know, we'll be saying goodbye to it. Metallic Rebuke, Dund Operative in the versions that have been playing black, Sweatworks Brawler in the versions that have been playing red, and then Renegade Map, of course, has kind of been the other cheap artifact that the Artificer decks have been playing. So all these cards are going away. There aren't really going to be cards that will replace it. The role in the metagame that Artificers has been playing has been it kind of loses to the aggro decks, especially Mono White aggro. Mono White aggro is really good at beating all the other aggro decks, so it's like the aggro deck that wins the aggro mirror. This is the Artificer deck is kind of like the aggro deck that wins the control matchup, but loses the aggro mirror, especially to Mono White. So, you know, this deck will pretty much be going away, and I'm not sure what's going to replace it, but again, it's going to leave a hole in the metagame, and only time will tell, or I guess, and as well as the spoilers for Guilds of Ravnica, will tell what's going to fill the void. So, RIP Artificers. Alright, next up, we've seen Blue-Black Control kind of rise to the forefront of the control decks since the printing of Salvager of Secrets, and Salvager of Secrets combined with Wander in Death kind of allow for, let me pull up Salvager of Secrets here. Salvager of Secrets plus Wander in Death kind of allow for the a loop to be created, right? Salvager of Secrets gets back Wander in Death gets back Salvager of Secrets plus another card. So once you get the loop going and you have enough mana, then you never run out of cards, and you can just bury your opponent in card advantage. This particular deck, Salvager of Secrets will remain legal, and there are two other options to kind of replace Wander in Death with Recover or Soul Salvage. You know, both kind of net you an extra card when you go through the loop, but neither of them are as good as Wander in Death, right? The ability to cycle Wander in Death was a really big factor in Control being able to be as consistent as it was. So really, the biggest hits that Control is taking is it's losing all of its cycle cards, and the cycle cards allow the Control deck to play the consistency game, right? If you have your big expensive cards in your hand early, you can cycle them away to try to dig for cheap removal. If you have too much card advantage in your hand, you can cycle away Wander in Death and Hieroglyphic Illumination to try to find cheap removal or lands if you need them. And just losing the ability to cycle, you know, makes the deck a lot less consistent. One of the pitfalls of the Control deck is that there's a saying in Magic where there's no wrong threat, right? Any threat will eventually kill your opponent if it's left unchecked, but there are wrong answers, right? You Moment of Craving is not going to kill any creature. Sometimes you need Murder. Murder is sometimes going to be too slow. Sometimes you need Fungal Infection to kill all their cheap 1-drops, right? So if you draw the wrong set of answers to whatever creatures your opponent just so happens to have, that's one of the pitfalls of a control deck. But you can make up for that by playing these cycle cards that add to consistency, but the control deck will be losing them on rotation. Also, the control deck's best finisher, Striped Riverwinder, it was great because not only did it have hexproof and it was huge, but it had cycling, right? Get those creatures in the graveyard so that Wander and Death will for sure have targets. I'm not sure what exactly the control deck is going to replace this with. It might be Coldwater Snapper. All right, 6 mana, 4/5 hexproof. It's similarly beefy. It's similarly hard to deal with, but the fact that it does not have cycling is a pretty big hit against it. I don't think you want to play 4 of this card in your control deck. You might want to play like 2 or 3 at the most, because if you draw your opening hand and you have 2 Coldwater Snappers in it, you're probably going to have to mulligan that. So you don't want to play too many big expensive threats, especially when you cannot cycle them away in the early game. And then also the control decks, since Salvager of Secrets came out and made the deck want to play more instants and sorceries, we haven't seen Unquenchable Thirst be played, but it was a big player in the metagame for a while, and it is notably going to be leaving. So the control deck is losing a handful of cards. The core engine of the deck will still exist with Soul Salvage and Recover, but and Salvager of Secrets, but it will be losing a lot of consistency, which will be a big knock against it. All right, moving down the list. We haven't seen Energy making waves in the format for a while, but, it will be rotating out. Energy, of course, is a mechanic very specific to Kaladesh, and Energy is a mechanic that plays really well with other Energy cards, but not really well with other cards. So, Attune with Aether was kind of like the backbone of the Energy deck. Fixed your mana, gave you some free energy, and then having good mana or energy sinks like Riparian Tiger, Thriving Rhino, Aether Stream Leopard, these creatures were significantly above curve if you had a steady stream of energy. We saw energy decks that paired with red that got to play Thriving Grubs and Aether Chaser, and we also saw energy decks that paired with black for Die Young and Thriving Rats. Unfortunately, all of these cards will be rotating out. So Energy was kind of like the mid-range deck of the format. I'm not sure what's going to take its place. In Standard Pauper, the mid-range decks and the ramp decks kind of look very similar. So the green-black ramp deck that we featured on our channel will be losing some of its parts, but will mostly stay intact, right? The majority of that deck was from Dominaria. So that might be what ends up filling the niche of this deck, but we'll have to wait and see. The one of the more powerful mid-range decks of the format is rotating out. We did see a moving on here, we did see a blue-green aggro deck have some success. I think Tegan took it to second place in one of the tournaments and then made top 8 with it at our scholarship tournament, and it is losing a number of key cards, most notably Frilled Sandwalla, right? This is probably Green's best aggressive 1-drop. Green still has Llanowar Elves as an amazing 1-drop, but Llanowar Elves is good at kind of ramping you to play bigger threats later, whereas Frilled Sandwalla is especially good at starting to attack real early and just pushing damage through. So a lot of the creatures that were featured in that blue-green aggro deck are rotating out. Ronus' Stalwart, Spellweaver Eternal, some of the more aggressive 2-drops that were in that deck. And then, of course, Cartouche of Knowledge. Lots of different decks are playing Cartouche of Knowledge. We even see it sometimes in Artificers, but Cartouche of Knowledge will be rotating out. And, this card was just so good, right? You make a creature bigger, you give it evasion, and it replaces itself. This card just did so much for 2 mana. Sad to see it leave. And then, of course, the cheap tempo plays that allowed the blue-green aggro deck to just kind of, keep tempo with all the other decks. Both of these will be rotating out as well, Unsummon and Shed Weakness. We are also seeing some of the pieces of mono black aggro rotate out here. Most notably Night Market Lookout, which was probably mono black aggro's most powerful 1-drop, right? Whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And of course, this it can become tapped not only by attacking, but by crewing Skyskiff. So the mono black aggro deck played a whole slew of 1-drops, Skyskiffs, and then a whole bunch of combat tricks, most notably Supernatural Stamina. Supernatural Stamina, there is a card in M19, gosh, I don't remember the name of it. I can't pull it up, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I think it's Abhorrent. Nope, I don't know. Alright, there is a card in M19 that is exactly the same as Supernatural Stamina, except that it costs 2 instead of 1, which is a huge knock against it, right? Supernatural Stamina did so much work because not only did it essentially, give your creature +2/+0 and make sure that it doesn't die in combat, but it only cost 1, so it went really well with the aggressive deck, and costing twice as much means that it's half as good. So, a lot of the other pieces of mono black aggro are still intact, but these are a lot of the most important pieces, so I would be very surprised if mono black aggro existed in the new metagame. It would have to change significantly, or pick up some new key pieces in order to remain competitive. Alright, moving on. Mono red aggro. This deck took second place at the Scholarship Tournament. We've seen mono red aggro do very well in our non-scholarship tournaments as well. And I have it lower here on the list because we've seen red be built in so many different ways that I'm very confident that red will still be a strong contender moving forward. Shock just got reprinted in M19. Lightning Strike was in Ixalan, so it wasn't going to rotate out, and then it got reprinted in M19 again. So Shock and Lightning Strike are still legal in the format, which is kind of the backbone of the red deck. The red deck is losing some of its best 2-drops, right? Aether Chaser and Firebrand Archer. But we didn't even see these played in every single red deck that has done well in the format so far. We've seen Viashino Pyromancer become much more popular. Goblin Instigator might see some play. So while the red deck is losing some very strong cards, there are already pretty solid replacements for these cards that we have seen. So I'm not that worried about this deck dying. Thresher Lizard was essentially a 3-mana 4/4. I don't know what the next best 3-drop is for the deck, but I'm not that worried. Magma Spray is rotating out, but the major appeal of Magma Spray was that it killed the Embalm creatures, which are also rotating out. So Shock is still going to be in the format. I guess one significant thing that's going out is Dual Shot. Oh, no, Dual Shot is an Ixalan, so Dual Shot will still be in the format, so don't worry about that. So Magma Spray is leaving, but it's not that big of a loss because so are the Embalm creatures. Blur of Blades, we did see an uptick of red decks playing this card. Being able to kill a creature and damage the controller is really big game, but it is leaving, unfortunately. I debated including these cards because we did do a deck tech on it. I think that this deck is very solid. We didn't really see anybody pick this deck up and take it to any success, but I still think that this deck was pretty solid. It might have just been a worse version of mono white aggro, though, because this deck did have to dip into a second color. But black-white zombies, it is losing all of its major zombie synergies, namely Innoketra's Name, right? 2-mana instant zombies you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Mummy Paramount had zombie synergy, right? Whenever a zombie comes into play, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And then Binding Mummy was probably the most powerful creature synergy that the deck had, where you could just tap down all your opponent's blockers. So the zombie payoff cards are leaving, and then of course this deck also played Fanbearer and Sacred Cat. Festering Mummy saw a little bit of play in this deck, so farewell to the zombie cards. Gravedigger is still in the format, which is a zombie, but it's unlikely to see it in any zombie synergy cards, unless we see an uptick of those in Guilds of Ravnica. Alright, moving on. These are just kind of like generic cards that saw play across a number of different decks. I guess you could include Skyskiff in this list, right? So, Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs, A bunch of different decks were playing it. The control deck was playing it for a little while when it didn't have as strong of an endgame with Salvager of Secrets. We saw various red decks play it as just a way to, block up the board and then end the game with the ping ability. So this card saw a significant amount of play in the format. It will be leaving. So will these vehicles, right? Renegade Freighter packs a huge punch. It can attack on turn 4 as a 5/4 trample. So lots of different aggro decks played this card, and they'll have to find a new marquee 3-drop threat. Hone Kopesh made the list just because it's so significant. There is a functional reprint of this in Dominaria, which is Short Sword, so the decks that wanted Hone Kopesh will still have access to it in the form of Short Sword. However, Hone Kopesh leaving means that those decks can no longer play more than 4 copies, right? We would very rarely see decks playing maybe 5 or 6 copies of this effect. So Hone Kopesh made the list for that reason. This is probably one of the impacts that affects lots of different decks, but all the deserts are going to be leaving. This was kind of one of the ways that the decks could kind of protect themselves against Mana Flood, right? They could play, more than 20 lands, playing maybe 22, 23 lands. And then even if they were an aggro deck with a low curve, by playing a handful of these cards, they kind of protected themselves against flooding out. But with that not being an option anymore, we're going to see decks have to fix the problem of Mana Flood in a different way. This was kind of like a free roll way to address Mana Flood, but decks will have to figure out something else to do. Sunscorched Desert might have belonged here in the red decks, because those are the decks, the mono red deck could most easily play it, and it fit in with the game plan most easily. But Sunscorched Desert leaving. Sometimes we would see the white decks playing it. If the white decks were playing a colorless land, they would usually be playing Cradle of the Accursed. But these cards basically fit into a bunch of different decks. So they're in this category here, since a lot of decks will be missing them. So goodbye utility lands. These were the 2 best utility lands in the format. All right, so those are all the cards that are going to be leaving. As far as the decks that are left untouched, I mentioned maybe the ramp deck will see more play. The control deck will still be intact, although much less consistent. The red deck will for sure still exist. Maybe we'll still see black aggro. But one deck that has it saw a bunch of success earlier, a few months ago in the format, but it kind of fell off the radar for a bit there. But Merfolk is poised to continue to be very, very strong in the format. The only card that Merfolk is really losing is Cartouche of Knowledge and Shed Weakness and Unsummon. But there are still going to be effects like Cartouche of Knowledge that are much less powerful. What is it called? One with the Wind. This card is legal. There's also a 1 mana version of this. I don't remember the name. Arcane Flight, I think. Yeah, so there are options to kind of fill the niche that Cartouche of Knowledge left behind. But basically, Merfolk still has a great curve. River Herald's Boon is still a super strong card. And Jade Guardian is, now that Bastion Inventor is gone, Jade Guardian is probably the #1 hexproof creature in the format. And it just so happens to be a Merfolk. So I think Merfolk is going to be poised to make a comeback. It might kind of fill the niche left behind by the Artificer deck. We will see. I mentioned the ramp deck earlier. I think that the ramp deck is still going to be quite good. The kicker cards from Dominaria, right, are quite good, right? Baloth Gorger. So we will see how the format progresses, and then also, of course, the spoilers from Guilds of Ravnica will give us a really good idea of maybe what decks are going to get a little bit of a boost. Guilds of Ravnica is it's a guild set, meaning that the majority of the strongest cards are going to be 2-color pairs. So we'll probably see a downtick in mono-colored aggro decks, right? I think mono-white aggro is going to be significantly weaker. Mono-red aggro will still be around, but mono-red aggro will probably not get too many tools from Guilds of Ravnica, whereas a lot of the two-color pairs will probably get a lot of goodies. So, with that said, I hope that this was informative for you guys. I'm really excited to see how the format changes in October, but we also still have a whole month left of our current format, which has been really good. So, thanks for stopping by, and if you appreciate our content, please consider becoming a Patreon subscriber. You can subscribe for as much or as little as you feel comfortable with, and we are coming out with a playmat perk for all of our bronze contributors or higher. And stay tuned to our social media pages for details on that as it solidifies. All right, thanks for stopping by, and I hope to catch you next time. Peace.